Story 1. A couple of weeks ago, my next-door neighbor with dementia went missing. I have seen this person take off and guided them back home before, so I knew they were not going very far without help. 2 weeks went by. I got on a stepladder, peeked over the fence, and indeed, my neighbor had not gotten far at all. Nobody bothered to check the entire very small backyard. I am a grown man who has seen some things, but that was the first time I called my mom for consolation. Story 2. I saw a pedestrian get thrown by a car. It looked like someone tossing laundry into the air. Then I saw her contorted body on the ground. Story 3. When I was a drug addict on the streets, there was a woman who would walk around with a little boy who looked to be 7 or 8 years old. I would see them walking around at 2 a.m., and cars would pull up and she would talk to them. She was negotiating deals with predators who would pay her, and she would let them molest the child. She was exploiting her own child for drug money. I saw her do this multiple times, and it drove me insane. It was one of the things that pushed me toward getting clean. People have no idea what kind of dark, depraved things go on in that world. Story 4. A cat was hit by a car. It was not the driver's fault. The cat ran out of a hedge into the back wheels. The cat was thrown into the air and landed with its back clearly broken. It looked right at me and started to crawl towards me, then died. What gets me is that the cat knew it was in so much trouble that its first instinct was to try to crawl towards a stranger. Story 5. I was at a pumpkin patch with my family on a hayride as a child. One child fell off the ride and was run over by the tractor. I still remember the screams. Story 6. Collapse of a terminal at Charles de Gaulle Airport in France happened about 100 feet behind where I was standing. Story 7. Was operating a freight train, passed a boat launch area, and saw a lot of police activity. Got closer and traveling about 5 miles per hour. Saw a large sport utility vehicle parked on top of a man's chest. Apparently, his wife caught him cheating at the park, ran him over, then parked the front tire on his chest and walked away. Story 8. I saw a deer with its 2 back legs broken. It had been hit by a car. Everyone had slowed down, and I saw it stagger away, the bottom half of its legs dangling. It had to step on the broken ends of its upper leg bones. There was nothing anyone could do. It just left. I hate thinking about how slowly it must have died. Story 9. I was hiking at a gorge, and there was a family with a border collie hiking. The rim trail had overlook walls occasionally. The dog hopped up on the wall, then jumped down the other side to everyone's horror. The family rushed to the wall to look over, and the little girl started wailing. The family held each other. Being a dog lover, that upset me. Did I just see a family pet jump off a 500-foot cliff? 10 seconds later, the dog returned over the wall. I don't know why the family couldn't see him, or maybe the little girl was overcome by fear, but the moment has stuck with me for 20 years. Story 10. I witnessed a car crash. The passenger did not have his seatbelt on, and he went flying through the windshield. Story 11. Our 15-year-old neighbor child was shot on our sidewalk in broad daylight. We live in an upper-middle-class suburb. Story 12. A few weeks ago, I was driving home late from work. I drove by a bad crash not long after it had happened. Emergency services had not even arrived yet. I saw a flaming body at the wheel of one of the cars. I did not stop because there were already 100 people crowded around screaming, and I did not want to be another person in the way of the emergency services. That is still stuck in my head. Story 13. A woman with her jeans torn open around the crotch, red thighs, red face, shaking breath, and twitching eyes is walking towards the police station, probably to report her assault. Story 14. I saw a man try to get out of Army basic training by shooting himself in the foot with an M16 rifle. He was in a cement bunker, and the ricochet severely injured him. The instructors intentionally made sure everyone on the firing line saw the aftermath. Story 15. I had the great displeasure of seeing an intoxicated man run over a woman. He completely ran over her and severed her from the waist down. Story 16. I used to work in forensic pathology as a technician full-time and still do removals part-time in a different state. Needless to say, I have seen a lot of horrific cases. Three that really stick out to me in no particular order are: 1. A man who died in a full bathtub and had been dead for at least 3 to 4 weeks in the summer. A 9-month pregnant woman who died from an overdose. We removed the fetus still in the amniotic sac at autopsy. A man who was sexually assaulted to death with various objects, one being the tuning end of a guitar. I held his entire rectum in my hand. Story 17. Probably holding a man's face on while I awaited the ambulance. He had been attacked by a dog, managed to get the dog off, and the owner contained it. The man got up, bleeding heavily and stumbling away. When I caught up to him, the dog had literally ripped his face off. It was hanging by a couple of still attached parts on his forehead and left cheek. I kept him talking and held his face on while awaiting responders. That was a hell of a morning. Story 18. I don't know if it was disturbing, but it was surreal. The morning after a flash flood ripped through a city, I saw something in a tree. The rushing water had stripped the clothing off the man's body, leaving him naked. He was hanging upside down in the tree branches, so all his blood flowed to his head. Half of his body was stone white, as rushing water can really clean a body, and the other half, where the blood was kind of dark purple. Story 19. My coworker fell through a plate glass window and cut his arm severely. I had to call emergency services and hold him together until they arrived. I would have more to say on it, but I still do not like thinking about it 4 years later. Story 20. A kid on a bunch of drugs at a house party was doing something dumb and had his finger in his mouth when he had a seizure. He started thrashing around and gnashing his teeth on his finger, which ended up completely degloving the entire digit. My best friend drove him to the hospital and was pulling strips of flesh out from under his seats for a couple of weeks afterward. I simply didn't know you could lose that much blood from just your hand. Story 21. I saw a car on fire with a person inside flailing on the Garden State Parkway heading south about 20 years ago. That event still haunts me. Emergency medical services were on scene, but I doubt the person survived. Story 22. I was getting ready to pull out of my apartment on a cold wintry day. There was a little bit of water on the road, but it was no longer snowing. 2 cars slipped on ice and had a head-on collision in front of me. Instantly, one car pulled out and drove away, and the other car was immobile with the horn blaring, unable to stop. My mom turned around, parked the car, and made me go back inside immediately to call emergency services and give them our address. I was 5 years old and thought it was just a bad wreck, and someone else ran away. I had no idea that running and hiding was wrong. My mom told me that day the driver was badly hurt but should be fine. Later in life, when I was about 16 and taking my driving test, I brought it up again, asking about it. She confessed that the driver had died instantly before she could help him. Thankfully, she saved my young self from realizing we had just witnessed a hit-and-run homicide. It terrified the 16-year-old version of me. Story 23. One of the most disturbing things I have witnessed was during a late-night commute. I saw a man on the street clearly having a mental breakdown, screaming, crying, and hitting himself. People walked past him as if he were not even there. No one stopped, not even to check if he was okay. It was heartbreaking and uncomfortable to watch. You want to help but do not know how, and the helplessness stayed with me. It made me realize how invisible people in crisis can become to the rest of the world. Story 24. I used to work at a beef packing plant. One night after my shift was over, I was winding down the cryovac machines when the new afternoon maintenance worker started working on a deboning machine. He did not follow the lockout-tagout procedure. When he leaned into the machine, he inadvertently turned it on and his hand went right into it. He quickly pulled the off toggle with his other hand, but it was too late. I ran over and saw what looked like a skeleton hand sitting in a glove-shaped puddle where his flesh used to be. I believe every maintenance worker took turns throwing up while dismantling the machine to get his hand freed. Story 25. Watching my father die. In the obituaries, it always says, died peacefully with his family by his side. It was not like that. Story 26. Workers working at airport sites are enduring temperatures of 45 degrees Celsius and above. Yet managers and employers are not providing the mandatory 12 to 2 p.m. break. They are giving 2 liters of water for half of the shift, whereas previously each person received 5 liters. Perhaps management is trying to save money, or the client wants to reduce costs. Regardless of the reason, this country shows no humanity, and poor people are treated like bricks to be stacked on top of each other. Story 27. Abandoned car parked in a very poor state, as if it had collided with other vehicles, with what appeared to be a bullet hole in the rear windshield. A few days later, Melina, a neighbor, told me the car was taken by the police because it was involved in a hit and run where a police officer shot the car 3 times. Story 28. A house was ransacked by Russian soldiers in Ukraine. A mother and daughter were probably assaulted and shot point blank in the back of the head. The father outside the building was also shot. I hope the perpetrators are caught, but there is no way to know. Story 29. As a teenager, I watched my best friend's dog try to rip their neighbor's kitten in half. We were inside when it started. I thought a child was dying because of the screaming we could hear outside. We ran out and saw a kitten caught in her dog's mouth. The dog was shaking its head while the kitten screamed. I freaked out and hit her dog on the head with my hand. He dropped the kitten, and we snatched it up to take back to the neighbors. I never heard what happened to the kitten afterward, but I know it was taken to the veterinarian. I can still hear the kitten's screams more than 20 years later. Story 30. A motorcyclist lost control on the freeway. The side of his face and head did not look good. If he had been wearing a helmet, he probably would have survived. Story 31. Had to literally pick up the pieces of someone I knew after a military vehicle was hit but declared reparable and recovered. I am not talking about putting a blown-off leg into a body bag with the rest of his remains. I am talking about wiping brains off the interior and collecting chunks in a bucket. I did not even know where he ended and where the guy next to him began. Story 32. I have investigated a large number of fatal crashes over 26 years. One case from 2005 still stays with me to this day and probably will forever. 2 brothers, aged 8 and 10, were riding a quad near a road. They lost control, went into the roadway, and were struck by a Suburban traveling at 55 miles per hour. I performed CPR on the 10-year-old boy while his father knelt beside him, begging for help in Spanish. Nothing could be done. I remember hugging this man as he sobbed. Story 33. When I was in college, a homeless man would always sleep by the stairs at the back of our dorms. It was near the smoking section, so I would often run into him while smoking and talking with friends. He had his whole camp set up back there and would sleep in his sleeping bag. One morning in October, I went out with my dorm mate for the first smoke of the day. It had been raining hard all morning. Usually, when it rained, the man would relocate until it passed. That morning, I noticed he was still in his sleeping bag, getting soaked. I didn't think much of it, assuming he must have been very drunk the night before. I was only 19 and pretty naive, so I quickly finished and rushed back to get ready for classes. Fast forward to about 4 in the afternoon. After a long day of thunderstorms and classes, I hurried back to my room to play some games but wanted to have one last smoke first. I went to the usual spot. It was starting to get chilly and was still raining heavily. I was bouncing up and down to stay warm while quickly finishing my smoke. That's when I noticed the man was still in his sleeping bag and hadn't moved. I looked at my buddy and mentioned I had seen him that morning, still sleeping. Jokingly, he said maybe he had died. As soon as he said that, we both looked at each other, feeling a wave of dread. We knew we had to check on him. As we walked over, with every step, the feeling grew stronger. When we reached him, he was tucked in up to his forehead and was wearing a beanie. It was still hard to tell his condition, even though he was lying in a large puddle. I put my hand on the sleeping bag, looking for any sign of breathing or movement. There was no warmth, no sound, just awful stillness, as if I was touching an inanimate object. I looked at my buddy, and we silently acknowledged what we feared. I pulled back the sleeping bag opening. Sure enough, he was gone. I remember the smell vividly. It was the most foul thing ever, and it took everything I had not to vomit. We called the police, who arrived very quickly. They didn't say much other than thanks for reporting it. They pulled him out, put him in an ambulance, and that was it. Now comes the disturbing part. I was still shocked and stressed, sitting lost in thought and going through my pack of cigarettes. About 45 minutes later, another homeless man walked by us, heading toward the stairs. He looked at us, pointed to the stairs, and asked, "He gone?" I just nodded and stared blankly at him. He said, I watched him walk to the spot, start going through the belongings left behind. Then he moved things around and picked up the sleeping bag someone had died in less than 12 hours earlier. He picked up that soggy sleeping bag, wrung it out, hung it over the ledge, and sat down. I eventually went back to my room, feeling disconnected, and went to bed. The next morning, I went out for a smoke, and what I saw still baffles me to this day. The man was curled up deep inside that same sleeping bag, the very one that could have been soaked in God knows what. That day was the day I realized the world is absolute madness. Story 34. Watching someone bite another person's lips off after attacking them with a glass. He took the lips with him so they could not be reattached. Story 35. I have been working at several hospitals for a few years. Stage 4 pressure ulcers on a patient who could not feel them. Multiple large, gaping, fist-sized holes on the patient's bottom. Necrotic tissue and bone were visible. We had to pack the wounds, which involved pushing dressings deep into these holes. It was made more surreal by the patient being annoyed at us for taking so long. I was grateful they could not feel any pain at that point. Watched a patient projectile vomit their own blood for several minutes. The entire bathroom was covered in blood. None of us had ever seen that much blood before. There is something very visceral about seeing it come out like that. Some staff had to sit down afterward. I witnessed a penis severed from the body. The patient did it to themselves while in an altered mental state. It is common in healthcare settings, but still difficult to see confused or dementia patients finger painting with their own waste for the first time. Also, patients pulling out their own catheters, both urethral and rectal. Story 36. Taliban rounded up the villagers in the square and made them watch as they beheaded a group of people. We were not allowed to intervene until the killings began. Our missiles struck a minute later, killing the Taliban, but did not save those poor victims. Story 37. When I was around 8 to 10 years old in the mid-1970s, I was at an amusement park and heard screams coming from the Ferris wheel. A blonde girl with very long hair was screaming because her hair was caught in the pin that holds the seating basket to the wheel. As the wheel turned, it kept winding more of her hair around the pin. Before the operator realized what was happening and stopped the ride, it had pulled a large chunk of her scalp off along with the hair caught in the pin. I do not know if the specific incident prompted the design change that added shields extending up the side and back of Ferris wheel seats to prevent this from happening, but I am sure it was not the first time it ever occurred and probably not the last. Story 38. My friend was on a video call during the coronavirus pandemic a few days before he died. I could see how the better part of his soul had already left his body, which was visibly breaking down. Story 39. I didn't directly witness it, but one of my childhood friends had a mental breakdown due to his domineering Christian mother. She had already driven the father out of the home. Finally, we heard screaming, and soon police cars were at our house. It turned out her son's mental break was so severe he stabbed her with a butcher's knife and then assaulted his mother. I remember walking by the house later that week, going through a lot of my own issues, and saw chalk images in front of the house intended for protection against demonic possession. As far as I know, the boy was placed in a mental institution for years. I do not know what happened to her. Story 40. I was in the Lincoln Tunnel, traveling from Manhattan to New Jersey. I was 2 cars behind a bus. A person ran in front of the bus and was struck and killed. I got out to try to help, along with the driver of the car in front of me. I will never forget how upset the bus driver was. There was nothing he could do to avoid it. Story 41. I grew up on a cattle farm. Cesarean births were quite common. One cow was giving birth to a stillborn calf. We assumed it would be another cesarean and a piece of cake since we had them all the time. But we had a new veterinarian, and he was determined it would be a regular birth. Things started badly when he broke the 2 front legs with ropes and a calving jack. Then the calf got stuck at the shoulders and was not coming any further. He had gone too far to perform a cesarean at that point and decided the best thing to do was to use the dehorning wire to cut up the stillborn calf and deliver it piece by piece. It was gruesome, and I can still remember the smell of it all. My dad, who had seen many difficult situations and is the most stoic man I know, was visibly shaken and was not right mentally for weeks after this. The cow also died from blood poisoning. Story 42. I once stumbled upon a video of people harming pets. I only saw about 15 seconds, but it was the one thing in life that genuinely disturbed me. I couldn't sleep properly for a few days as those images kept coming back. Story 43. When I was 18, I went on my first big road trip alone. I drove to Chicago. I planned to spend the first day driving around and seeing the sights. I saw what looked like a homeless man walk into traffic without looking both ways and immediately disappear under a semi-truck as soon as he stepped off the curb. Story 44. I responded as a lifeguard to an active drowning involving a 5-year-old child. Although the incident was not in my assigned zone, I called it out and took the lead. Once the child was out of the water, everyone froze, mainly because all the other lifeguards were seniors in high school. I immediately followed our training. The child started vomiting, which I thought might be a positive sign. The mother and family were screaming hysterically. The mother admitted fault, as we had warned the entire family multiple times and threatened to remove them from the park if they neglected their child again. It was a large water park on July 4th and exceptionally busy. The situation was tragic, as the child was pronounced deceased upon arrival. The debriefing revealed the strange ways the human mind protects itself from that level of stress. I have never felt so shocked, confused, sad, angry, and guilty in my life, and I still think about it to this day. I watch my boys very carefully because of it. Story 45. Still witnessing the disturbing administration in the United States. It is like a live history lesson from 1930s Germany playing out right in the United States. Everyone always asks Germans how they could let Hitler happen. They should look closely at what is going on in the United States. There are many similarities in how everything started. Story 46. I once saw a documentary about female coyotes who were driven out of the pack. They sometimes waylay a pack male and mate, but their pups are born at a different time than the others. These pups are smaller and the other pups bite and bully them. Eventually, they are bullied to death. There was a picture of a coyote pup crying, hungry, bullied, and dying. It will never be forgotten. I was watching a low-budget horror movie, and the actress hit a mouse with a hammer and killed it. That really shocked me. Story 47. Several events I will not discuss, but I will share the following. My friend's intoxicated mother was either pretending or actually attempting to walk in front of a train. I had to hold her back while my crying friend screamed at me to stop her. I was 13 years old. Additionally, a necrotic toe slowly rotted away over several weeks until it was hanging by a single sinew. Story 48. A woman discovering on national television that her husband broke her daughter's legs. The scream she let out haunts me. Story 49. People waste their entire mornings and evenings consuming for-profit news designed by psychologists employed by billion-dollar organizations to keep you addicted and aligned with the best interests of trillion-dollar companies and politicians. It is a useful idiot creation machine. Ditch it all. Story 50. Things continue on a battlefield that reveals how deeply troubled we are as a species. The situation is significantly worse when an urban population is involved. Genuinely disturbing content. Story 51. About 4 years ago, on a Sunday morning, I heard a loud boom from outside the house. I looked out the front door and saw a car on its roof in the next-door neighbor's yard and the young woman who had been driving it lying motionless in the middle of the road. Chilling. Story 52. In many ways, I feel lucky that I have only seen a handful of disturbing things in my life, especially compared to some others. I am old enough to remember the horrible things you could find on the early internet like Rotten.com and other sites, and that was bad. I have avoided looking at those kinds of horrors for years now. There is no need to seek out war footage, for example, and I have been fortunate not to encounter it on social media. The descriptions are terrible enough. The ones I recall clearly: 1. I saw the aftermath of a motorcyclist crashing into a guardrail on Interstate 95. Severed his leg at the crotch. I will never forget seeing a leg lying there, a massive splash of blood, and his body partially obscured behind the guardrail. I saw the story that night confirming that he died. 2. Animal-related deaths. I watched a turtle get run over by the vehicle in front of me while driving home from work. It was close to 20 years ago, and the sudden collapse of its shell under the weight of the tire and the flattening of the poor creature was haunting. I have seen my share of squirrels, chipmunks, woodchucks, and other animals hit, and it is always sad, but that turtle stands out. 3. A parent harming their child for misbehaving in a restaurant. I was about 12 at most, and a man dragged his screaming young son, maybe 4 or 5 years old, into the bathroom and proceeded to hiss at him that he needed to be quiet and behave while simultaneously yanking him into the air and spanking him hard. My father came in to use the bathroom as it was ending, and I think that made the man stop. I grew up in a house that did not practice corporal punishment and, while loud with multiple siblings, did not include any kind of verbal or emotional abuse. It was horrifying to see it happening to a child and was a formative experience for me. Story 53. In the early days of iPods, I saw a man with headphones on, staring at his iPod while walking. He walked straight into an intersection and was hit by a sport utility vehicle. He survived, but it did not look like that would be the outcome when it happened. Story 54. I'm not sure what to mention first. Let's try this. As a late teenager, I was groomed and abused by a person who also showed me child sexual abuse material they had on a hard drive. Children of various ages and ethnicities. Story 55. My 16-year-old stepson's head after he went through the windshield during a head-on collision with an intoxicated driver who had fallen asleep with the cruise control on. She crossed the median, which had no barrier, and the combined speed of the collision was around 150 miles per hour. I did not know there could be such horror in the world. He survived a few hours but ultimately succumbed to his head injury. A close second was a photo of the driver from the back, with one leg outside the car. I never saw the front view, but the other kids said he was severely injured from the waist up. Interestingly, the front passenger, who was wearing his seatbelt, survived with only a small crack in his femur. The other driver pled guilty to vehicular manslaughter and received a 6-year sentence. She had just turned 21 a few days earlier. It is sad for everyone involved. Story 56. Heard about a suicide. A teenager in my high school jumped out of a window because his parents did not believe him when he said he was assaulted by a priest. Story 57. At age 8, I was a passenger in a car involved in a pileup crash on the interstate that affected both directions of the turnpike. I watched victims being pulled out of cars. I saw one person die and a couple already gone while I waited to be placed in an ambulance. I saw another person die in the hospital. I am not going to write down the details. Just use your imagination. Story 58. Saw a cat get run over by a car on the way home from work a few weeks ago. It darted out of some bushes and went right under a wheel of a sedan traveling at about 30 miles per hour. I think its head was severely injured because its legs started violently moving midair while it was being dragged on the pavement, unable to right itself. It was horrific, but hard not to compare it to a wacky inflatable balloon man going off in the middle of the street, because that's what it looked like. I almost got out of the car to grab it and drive to the vet, but I thought it might be someone's cat in the neighborhood and figured it was a lost because given how violently it was convulsing. I parked my car and walked back about 5 minutes to where it had been hit. Someone must have picked it up to rush it to a vet or bury it. Story 59. My mom was having a stroke. I was in my room FaceTiming my girlfriend when I heard my mom's boyfriend yelling her name repeatedly. I went into their room and saw him and several paramedics who had arrived without me noticing. She was vomiting and writhing, and one of the emergency medical services personnel asked me about the medications she was taking. I started crying and went back to my room. I'm still ashamed of that. It wouldn't have helped if I had told him, even if I had known, but it was the last time I allowed myself to be overwhelmed by emotions in an emergency. Story 60. The accident that killed the wife of my cousin, the mother of twin boys aged 5. I saw it in all its gruesomeness. Her mangled body was pressed against the front window, blood everywhere. Where a face or head should have been, there was only bloody pulp. I was in my early teens when it happened, but I can still see it in my mind as if it just happened. Story 61. I remember seeing a video recently of a man in the Middle East walking up to a Palestinian flag planted by the side of the road. I think he was trying to vandalize or remove it. When he approached the flag, he suddenly turned into pink mist. There was a landmine planted underneath. The woman recording the event laughed and said something to the effect of Allahu Akbar. Instagram reels are quite intense. Story 62. I watched a woman climb over the barrier of a 5-story car park, stand for a moment, and then let go. She hit the ground within 10 seconds, bounced slightly, and then fell still. I remember screams from other witnesses, including many teenagers, as it happened directly across from an art college. She did not die on impact, but perhaps 30 seconds later. There was a lot of blood due to internal bleeding and lacerations from hitting the concrete. She lay there for 5 minutes before someone covered the body. There were many witnesses. It is the screams I remember the most. 2 other people jumped from the same spot at different times, so there is now fencing to stop it. That was the first suicide I witnessed. The second was a man who jumped off a bridge and just disappeared. I saw it all in my car mirror. He was there and then he was gone. Story 63. A pregnant mother of 2 boys and her children died in a fiery crash. I was the second person on the scene, not the person mentioned in the article. They did not scream for long. There was nothing I could have done, but I also got burned. Story 64. In my first year of medical school, I witnessed the autopsy of a child. We had classes in a room with corpses preserved for 50 years stacked on top of each other. Preserved twin babies in a jar, amputated legs, and organs labeled with the person's name and the year they died. During my first internship at a small hospital, I went to the bathroom and only after a while did I realize there was a corpse. Since it was a small hospital, they had no proper storage space. Story 65. On the bus ride home after middle school, we drove past an orange tabby cat lying in the road that had just been hit. There was a sizable pool of blood coming from its abdomen, so I thought it was dead. Then the poor animal lifted its head to watch the school bus pass. Story 66. My dad was shot to death in my living room when I was 6. He abused my mom. My grandfather got tired of it. I have acted out the daddy wake-up scene from The Lion King in real life. Story 67. My coworker threw baby rats under a passing loader after finding them at work. It upset me deeply, and I have seen objectively worse things. Story 68. I saw a man calmly eating pani puri right next to a road accident scene. There was literal chaos on one side, and he was asking for extra spicy sauce on the other. Story 69. I was kidnapped 3 months ago by organ harvesters. Trust me, I saw things I don't think I will ever forget. Story 70. Someone fell out of a cage on a carnival ride called the Zipper. Apparently, one of the workers did not realize the person had not gotten off yet and moved the cage up while the door was still open. They are luckily alive, thank God. Story 71. Not really disturbing, just sad. Recently, I was doing a survey on a house and noticed a woman walking her husky across the street. I looked again and saw the dog on the ground with her crouched over it. I thought maybe the dog was having a walk protest, but she looked back at me and screamed for help. The dog was unconscious. I gave her water until a family member came and picked them up. I can still see the dog's face. It looked like it had died, honestly. Eyes wide open, tongue out, not responding to anything. I helped get the dog in the car and never heard anything about it again. I read that this is how dogs faint, which gave me a little hope, but it was peak heat during the day with no shade. Story 72. 2 individuals using methamphetamine engaging in inappropriate behavior across from an elementary school. A few days later, observing a woman performing oral sex on a man in the same location. Story 73. I went to a catfish processing plant, that is, a slaughterhouse, as a field trip for an aquaculture class I took as an undergraduate. It reaffirmed my decision to remain a vegetarian. Story 74. A man threw himself in front of a street sweeper, was disemboweled, and tied into a knot. I witnessed a suicide from a 12-story jump onto the sidewalk. A 2-week-old baby girl was drowned by her father. The human remains of a man caught in his burning house resembled a 2-foot log. I pulled the gelatinous remains of a body out of the harbor. A man blew off his jaw, and his tongue was just hanging and wagging. Dead on arrival cases had bloated so much their feet popped out of their sneakers. There were 2 decapitations on the subway. Another man under the subway had to be carried by 8 of us because every bone was pulverized and every organ liquefied, but there was not a scratch on his skin. A 13-year-old honor student was dead on the sidewalk because a gang member mistook the color of his shirt and shot him in the head. A woman walked up to me and said she had stabbed herself. When I asked where, she lifted her shirt, spread her belly button, and her guts fell out. 2 planes flew into the World Trade Center. It is a wonder I can sleep at all. Story 75. People on Reddit are saying that Iran should be allowed to build nuclear weapons. During the 1990 Gulf War, I witnessed a pile of dead Iraqi soldiers, 12 feet high, being bulldozed into a hole in the desert. I have post-traumatic stress disorder because of that experience. Story 76. I was driving for a ride-sharing service one night and had just picked up a carload of college students who were surprisingly respectful and friendly. As I reached an intersection, there was a man and a woman arguing right outside a pub. Suddenly, the man started hitting the woman very violently. He had her on the ground and was striking her repeatedly. The only people in the car who clearly saw what happened were myself and the front passenger. The other students in the back were laughing because they thought it was 2 men. The front passenger then told his friends that the man was attacking a woman. We all fell silent for the rest of the ride. None of us really knew what to do, and I still do not know what to do if something like that happens again. Story 77. My husband and I had just moved to the French Quarter. We were walking to where my car was parked when 2 men ran past us at full speed. Then police officers were running after them. There was a robbery and shooting right by my car. Paramedics were just reaching the victim, who had blood pooling all around. In the dark, I thought it was her hair. Story 78. Head-on collision between a car and a motorcycle. The biker flew about 20 meters through the air. His leg was thrown 25 meters. First on the scene and will never forget. Story 79. I watched my beloved cat get literally torn into pieces by my uncle's Rottweiler. I was hanging out with some friends when one of them pointed toward my yard to ask about the dog. I looked over and noticed the dog flinging its head about, as if playing with a toy. It caught my attention immediately. So I took another look and realized the dog had my cat in its mouth and was tearing it apart. The lasting image of my cat in 3 parts, scattered across my lawn. The head with eyes wide open, part of the upper body, and then the legs. I was 11 when this happened. Story 80. A man was shot in the head on the street behind my house. My neighbor used his finger to plug the hole in the man's head to try to stop the bleeding. The man was already deceased. Story 81. When I first got my motorcycle license and a bike, my first ride was with my father. We saw the body of a motorcyclist being covered. He was hit by a car that ran a red light. We rode past just as they covered his face. Story 82. Dismembered human remains in jars. In 3rd grade, our class took a field trip to the police headquarters and toured several departments, including forensics. At the coroner's office, we were shown 3 specimen jars containing a preserved human head, an arm, and a leg. The coroner explained that the remains belonged to the first documented murder victim in my country's history to have been dismembered by the killer back in the 1960s. To this day, I can still picture the stubble on the man's face, the strands of hair suspended in formaldehyde, and the half-open mouth. I don't know why the teacher thought letting a group of 9-year-olds into a coroner's office was a good idea. Story 83. I visited a historical and religious place in my state in India. I checked into a decent hotel room and opened the window curtains to see a disturbing scene of a child being sexually exploited by an adult at a distance. This happened about 10 years ago, and I hope the child has grown up to be a healthy and responsible citizen. Story 84. Once, I stopped to check on someone who hit a curb while making a left turn, which disabled their sport utility vehicle. The person was obviously intoxicated. I was on the sidewalk talking to him, asking if he was okay. He had exited his vehicle and was searching his glove box for tow truck information when another car traveling approximately 50 miles per hour hit him and the vehicle. Story 85. Dead baby, approximately 2 months old. No gore. The child was born with a congenital heart defect. He was not breathing well, and after a few minutes, his heart stopped. The end. Story 86. My own pinky was torn off when I was 15. I was riding dirt bikes with a family friend who was 12. We went to a quarry with huge dirt hills and open space to ride around, about a half-hour ride from his mom's house. I went up a tall hill and hit a patch of loose dirt. The bike's tires started to spin and my momentum stopped. I fell off backward with the bike above me. My first instinct was to push the bike off to the side so it wouldn't land on me, and I somehow inserted my pinky into the sprocket on the back tire, which seized the bike's engine. I ended up stuck on a flat area of the hill holding the bike so it wouldn't slide the rest of the way down. I couldn't reach the clutch to turn the back tire and get my hand out, so I just stood there waving until someone saw me. Luckily, some older kids, maybe 18 or 19 years old, had showed up as well and were riding around. One of them saw me and came over to help. He pulled the clutch and I was able to turn the tire and free my hand. I thought my finger was just broken because I could barely feel it. He told me to take off my glove, and when I did, what looked like ground hamburger meat flopped out, hanging by about a centimeter of flesh. It hadn't started bleeding much yet, so I could see all the meat and bone. What was left of my fingertip was my exposed nail bed. The fingernail was sticking straight up, perpendicular to the rest of the mess. After a few seconds, it filled with blood, and that was all you could see. I immediately went into some kind of shock. I was surprisingly calm and it didn't hurt much, but all I could think was, I just lost a finger. The kid I had been riding with immediately started crying when he saw it and ran to some nearby houses, pounding on doors to try and get a phone to call his parents. The two older kids gathered all 4 of our bikes, loaded them onto their truck, and wrapped my hand in a clean pair of spare socks. Then we all piled in and went to the hospital. By the time the shock started wearing off and the excruciating pain began, the hospital gave me some strong painkillers. My parents showed up and demanded a second opinion when the hospital said they were just going to snip it the rest of the way off. I ended up getting transferred to a hand clinic in Philadelphia, where they quickly stuffed the meat back in and sewed it together to prepare me for microsurgery the following morning. According to them, 1 nerve and 1 blood vessel were intact in that little strip of flesh connecting the mess to my hand, and that was enough to potentially save the finger. Every hour that night, a nurse had to come in and prick my fingertip with a needle to make sure blood was still flowing through the finger, so I got pretty much no sleep. Surgery the next morning went well, and they saved my finger. That was almost 25 years ago now. My finger is still a scarred mess, but it works. I am still thankful to those older kids who dropped everything to help me. It is because of them that I still have a finger. I never even got their names. They only stayed at the hospital until my parents arrived, and I had already been moved into a bed at that point. My parents thanked them and gave them $100 each as a reward, but I really wish they had gotten their names as well. There have been many times I wished I could reach out to thank them, because I never really got the chance. It all turned out fine in the end, but I will never get that initial image of the mangled mess of what used to be a finger flopping out of my riding glove out of my mind. It is burned in forever. Story 87. 2 years ago, I was first on the scene of a road collision involving a truck and an elderly man. Unfortunately, the man had been in the pub right on this busy road, and while walking alongside it, he fell into the road and under the wheels of an articulated lorry. His body was dragged and crushed for about 200 meters. I was the first person to find what remained of him. It is a bit of a blur, but to this day I have flashbacks of what I saw that evening. The situation was made worse by the fact that it was rush hour, dark, and foggy. I also felt for the truck driver, as he had no idea what had happened until he got to the depot about 10 miles away. Story 88. A couple of weeks ago, on my way to the bus stop at about 5 a.m., I saw several police trucks rush down the street. When I turned the corner, there was a fresh corpse lying there, with a pool of blood nearby. Story 89. Just a lot of random deaths. Hiking in a park in Canada due to a heart attack. Going to a hot spring in Japan due to a heart attack. Walking down the street in Canada and in Paris, struck by a motorcycle or involved in a building jumper incident. Story 90. I was waiting for a shuttle to go to truck driver orientation in Spokane, Washington, when I witnessed a group of homeless people with machetes attack a man across the street. They thought he was attacking a woman, but it turned out she had robbed him, and he was chasing her to get his wallet back. Story 91. I saw a police officer shoot at a man fleeing with what ended up being a compact disc case worth maybe $5, but was at the time believed to be a purse. Story 92. Train station in France. A screaming homeless man, visibly in a mental crisis, literally struck his forehead against a large metal pillar, causing blood to splash in front of the crowd. The train I was on was slowly leaving. Story 93. Two people collapsed on the street on two separate occasions and were administered cardiopulmonary resuscitation. One man had agonal breathing, which was very disturbing. While I was still far away, I thought it was a cow lying low to the ground inside the city, which was very strange. The ambulance was underway both times. I do not know what happened to them. Story 94. I live in a city with a high suicide rate, so it's not unusual to come across victims or hear about incidents nearby. I've encountered 4 in my 2.5 years of living here. The one that struck me the most was one night on a national holiday. Around 1 a.m., when I went out to buy dinner at a convenience store, I noticed a man lying face down on the concrete in a quiet back alley. I initially thought he was just passed out drunk, which is a very common occurrence where I live, but I noticed a small stream of blood. It wasn't anything too bloody or gory, so I immediately tried to roll him over to wake him up. Then I noticed his forehead was caved in. It finally dawned on me that the man was dead. I immediately ran back to the store and had the owner call emergency services because I didn't really know the address or the right thing to do in such a situation. I can't really put a finger on why it bothered me so much. I wasn't traumatized, but just that image. On a holiday night where most people relax with loved ones, while he quietly lies alone in a dark alley, and eventually the police stood around his body, sighing like it was a mundane chore. I felt bad for him, but I don't want to die like that. That was my biggest takeaway. It's a reality that many people face. I have clinical depression, but so do many others around my age, so it feels a bit edgy to say this, but every time I feel like I'd rather die than be in this situation, that night pops into my head. Every time someone says they want to do it, I want to show them that image. Not in a guilty way like, oh, you have to appreciate what you have, but just simply, you do not want to die like that. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.